Welkom, beste kijkers, bij AGORA, aflevering 386. Ik hou de tel goed bij. En vandaag een Engels sprekende gast uit Amerika, Mr. Dane Waters. En daarom gaat de hele uitzending wel in het Engels. Dus degene die dat niet kan volgen, die moet nu gaan zippen. En degene die dat wel kan volgen, die kan lekker blijven hangen. Mr. Dane Waters is from the United States of America and he's the president of the Initiative and Referendum Institute. That is just go on a little bit in Dutch again, because
Okay.
for the people, I just said you step away when you don't understand English, but if you do understand English, then you can stay. But maybe I explain him in Dutch.
Oh, I understand.
The guy you are. Is that good?
That's fine.
Oké. Dane Waters is president van het Initiatief en Referendum Instituut in Amerika. En het is een zeer gezaghebbend, objectief informatieleverend instituut over referenda in heel Amerika. En in Amerika zijn in 24 van de deelstaten wordt eigenlijk geregeerd door directe democratie met enorm veel referenda en initiatieven van burgers. Dus een veel lager politiek profiel en daarom is het instituut ook zo belangrijk. En wat ook grappig is, en daar zullen we het straks ook zeker over gaan hebben, is dat hij in de campagne van Ronald Reagan heeft meegewerkt. En later nog in de campagne van George Bush senior. En dat hij zelfs onlangs nog een gesprek heeft gehad met George W. Bush. Kortom, ik heb hier een zeer belangrijke Amerikaan aan de tafel. I just said I have a very important American guy at my table. Welcome in my talk show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Okay, and you're only here for 2.5 days actually.
48 hours, yes.
It's the first time you've been in Amsterdam?
My first time in Amsterdam.
Give us your impression.
It's a beautiful city. Beautiful city. The people are wonderful. The people are very friendly.
Yeah. How do you notice that? Because
Well, just walking down the street. I mean, just walking down the street, people, say hello, and you go into these cafes. I guess that's what you call them here.
Yeah.
People are very friendly, and they're willing to talk and carry on a conversation. So, just the whole feeling is it's very relaxed, wonderful.
you don't feel any tension or aggression on the
No,
street.
none whatsoever.
Well, some Amsterdam people do, but you haven't.
Maybe
been,
that's when you're walking down the street.
That's true too. That's true too. But the other point is that you haven't been really out yesterday night, because yesterday in the afternoon you arrived and you had a dinner
Yes.
with some people, and then you didn't go out in the city, did you, last night?
No, I did
You were
not. I did
very
not.
tired, of course.
Very tired. I came in late last night, had a meeting, got up this morning, had a very nice lunch today.
Yeah.
I haven't been completely exposed to the people of Amsterdam, but the people I have met have been wonderful.
Okay, and maybe tonight you will have the nightlife, and if you don't like it, then if you do feel or this sense of aggression, then let me know, and
I'll come back on the show and I'll say
then
that.
you come back to invite you over. Okay, tell me a little bit about yourself. You live in Washington D.C. at this moment.
I live in Washington, D.C. I'm originally from Birmingham, Alabama, which is a state in the South.
Yeah.
I've been living in Washington for 13 years. I moved there to work for George Bush Sr., his administration.
What kind of work? What was the work?
Well, I did a lot of work for in the White House, advance work, doing all the logistical support for his travels overseas and Dan Quayle's travels overseas. Did some policy work with the General Services Administration. So I did that for 3.5 years. And then I left the administration and went to work for a nonprofit organization called U.S. Term Limits, whose goal was to place term limits or limit the amount of terms that lawmakers could serve at all levels of government.
That means that also law firms, or what? No.
No.
In political functions.
Yeah, like it's like our members of Congress, our state legislators, city councilmen, governors. We believe that elected officials should only serve for so many years, and there should be a rotation in office to allow new blood to come in.
Yeah. But how come? Because in the on presidential level, that is already a long time the case. These terms. How come that for governors that's not the case?
Well, the 22nd Amendment, which placed term limits on the president, came about after Franklin Delano Roosevelt had been president for 16 years.
Right.
And Congress felt that the president had become too powerful and they didn't want that to happen again, so Congress placed term limits on the president. 35 governors in the United States are term limited, but members of Congress are not term limited, primarily because it has required it would require a change to the Constitution of the United States,
All right.
and members of Congress aren't willing to limit their own terms because they want to serve 30,
Sure,
40,
sure.
50, 60 years.
That amount, there are really governors who served for 30 or 40 years?
There are some governors who have served at that length of time. There are members of state legislatures who have served for 30, 40 years. Strom Thurmond, who's a U.S. senator, is about to turn 100 years old. He's been he's been a U.S. senator for 50 years.
Unbelievable.
And there's no doubt that, you know, the term limit movement believe that there should be a rotation in office because you need new blood, fresh
Sure.
perspectives,
Yeah.
and so working for U.S. term limits. I got the taste of the initiative process, what we call the initiative process in the United States,
Yeah.
where we put over close to 60 initiatives on the ballot across the country at all levels of government to limit terms of elected officials because they wouldn't do it themselves.
Yeah.
And we were quite successful in doing that.
It was quite successsul.
We-
About
we-
95% of the cases you won.
95% of the time
Yeah.
we won.
So how does it work then? If you say, on the one hand, as an example, the governor doesn't want to, get rid of this of his power, so he wants to stay in office all the time. At the same time, you have the space in America for initiatives,
Yes.
which is a threat to the power of the politicians, isn't it?
That is correct. I mean,
Where does it come from that there is this space?
well,
in
there's
this,
let me just give you a little background real
Yeah.
quick. In the United States, 24 states has the initiative process. States like California and Florida and Michigan.
in the legislation, they've written it down in the Constitution.
It's in the
or-
Constitution,
okay.
right? It's a constitutional right.
Yeah.
And so what has happened basically since 1990, the people using the initiative process, which is a process where they go out and collect signatures and
Yeah.
put a law on the ballot and the people vote on it, they have placed term limits on lawmakers. They have passed what we call tax limitation laws, which limit the ability of politicians to pass taxes, increase taxes. And so all of these reforms that have limited the power of state government or elected officials don't like that. They don't like the fact that their power has been
No,
limited.
of course not.
So what they've done is that they've come back over the last several years and tried to take the initiative process away from the people by passing new regulations and restrictions on it so that people can no longer limit their power.
Yeah.
So
But why in 24 states? Because that's what if you give some historical reasons for why in some states there is a space for initiatives and in other states there isn't. How does that come?
in the mid 1800s, there was the populists and progressives, what we call the populists and progressives, the Progressive Party.
Yeah.
They had a series of reforms that they wanted to propose because they believed that state lawmakers were no longer responsive to the people, and there was no check and balance on the people. So they started a series of reforms, and one was the initiative and referendum process, and they were successful from about 1865 through 1898, successful in getting 21 states to adopt the initiative process. And most of those states were out west, primarily because in our country, in the New England states like New York, and in the South like Alabama and Georgia, the people in power there were less likely to give the initiative process to the people because they were concerned that the immigrants or the African American community could use it to break up their power struggle.
Right.
And out west, that wasn't as much of a problem or concern. So that's why you see the initiative process existing primarily out west.
That's interesting.
And not, and so the bottom line is racism and was the main reason that the initiative process did not expand into the New England states or the southern states.
Yeah. And I figure because now you are the president of the Initiative and Referendum Institute, which is a highly respected institute, as I understood it.
I hope so.
Well, you're many times asked for CNN to give comments on the ballot issue, which we had with the president's elections and so on, but we'll talk about that later. But you are still working in the states that have no possibility for the initiatives,
Yes.
and then you're still working to expand to give space to that.
There's two things that we're focused on. One is trying, in the 24 states that have the initiative process, we're trying to protect it to keep it from being taken away.
Yeah, because it is being attacked.
It is being
by the
attacked.
politicians.
Yes, it is being attacked by the politicians. So we're trying to protect that through a series of, we're bringing lawsuits, political activity, whatever's necessary to protect it. I'm a firm believer that there's no sense in expanding a process if it's being taken away in other states at the same time. So we're trying to protect it. we are also trying to expand it. We're working in states like Louisiana and Minnesota, and there's strong movements in Texas and some movements in New York State. We're trying to expand it. The problem with expanding the initiative process is that it requires the state legislatures to propose an amendment, which is, as we talked about, is very difficult because they see that as an attack on their power.
Yeah. And because I know that you know a little bit from the Dutch situation and some of the other countries in Europe, Holland is really very backward in the development of referendum. There is now this discussion going on in Parliament, and they will take a decision probably in a week or 2 weeks. And there will be a referendum with such high thresholds that it's very difficult to organize one, and then secondly to win one. What kind of attacks, say in that way, by politicians do you get? Is it in the same direction that they say we have to have higher thresholds? It shouldn't be that easy for citizens to come up with an initiative or to win a referendum?
Yes. What is happening is that no politician in the United States will actively or come out and say, I oppose the initiative process, because the people support it overwhelmingly, 70 to 80% of the time. So they operate under the premise saying that, well, it's a good process, but we need to reform it. We need to make it better. Yeah. But what they're doing is they're passing regulations like increasing the number of signatures you need to collect, limiting where you can collect signatures, limiting who can collect signatures. I mean, all of these new regulations that they call reforms are doing nothing but taking the process out of the hands of the average citizen, which is what I see in many countries around the world, that you have governments saying, well, we support the people's right to use direct democracy, but we're going to create a system that makes it almost impossible for them to use. That way they can, try to convince the people that they support it, but then create a mechanism that just can't be used to protect their power. And I think that has that's similar to what you're seeing going on here and other countries throughout Europe and the world. But
then there are two directions. You can defend something that is already existing, which makes it for politicians more difficult to limit the rights of people. And here you can say that we are fighting to expand the possibilities for referenda, and they are defending, the politicians are defending their power, because until now there is no possibility of a referendum on national level whatsoever.
Yeah, in the United States, the same thing is happening, where you have several governors, like Governor Ridge of Pennsylvania, Governor Pataki of New York, all campaigned saying that I want the initiative process in the state. Right, yeah. And then after they're elected,
they forget about it.
Well, it's not that they necessarily forget about it. What they'll do, they'll go to the legislature and have the legislature hold hearings just to give the perception that they're trying to do something. There's in Texas, which is one of the largest states in our union, in 1914, the legislature placed an initiative law on the ballot for the people to approve, but it had such high thresholds saying that you had to get 25% of all the citizens from every single county. It would not have been a workable initiative process, so the voters voted it down because they said, listen, we'd rather have no process than a process that is unusable.
That's exactly what I want to do in Holland, actually. Yeah. But this law is excluding the possibility of getting this law under for a referendum. But okay, go on. So in Texas, they said that rather no process than
that's the thing,
than a bad process.
Because what could possibly happen here is if this referendum law as proposed becomes law, you'll have the politicians saying, oh, we heeded the wills of the people, we gave you the referendum process, even though it's an unusable process. Yeah. So they're going to take advantage of the fact saying, well, we gave you what you wanted, but the people can't use it. And I think that is, I think that's disingenuous, I think that's a problem, and I think it should be fought.
But I also think it's even dangerous for a politician to do so. We warned the Dutch members of parliament by saying, if you organize a referendum, or if you make this legislation for a referendum, what happens is that if somebody wants to start a referendum, they only get very frustrated, and the public will get very frustrated, more frustrated with politics than they are now.
That's possible, and I hope that happens. I mean, there is some, using the precedent in the United States where what has happened in the United States actually is that as legislators have placed more restrictions on the process, what has happened is that you're finding that there's more money in the initiative process. It's taking more money to utilize the initiative process in the United States. So instead of there being a backlash against the lawmakers who made it so difficult, there's somewhat of a backlash against the initiative process because the people are saying, wow, look at all this money in the initiative process. It's bad. Even though the lawmakers are the one to blame for it. And so lawmakers are using that as an opportunity to add more regulations and restrictions, saying we need to limit money and all this kind of stuff. So, you know, I hope what you're saying is true, that the people become frustrated and they hold the government accountable for that, versus the government gets off the hook per se, you know, because the people say, well, we need to regulate it even more, restrict it even more, do something like that. So, I'm optimistic that, you know, the people here will eventually realize that the law that the government is proposing is bad, and maybe that will force the parliament to do something about it. But you know, that has not been the case, unfortunately, in other countries. And
is there on national scale, on federal scale, is there a possibility of a referendum, national referendum
in the United States?
Yeah,
we're one of 5 democracies that's never held a national referendum on anything.
Right.
And
Holland is one of the 5 too.
Right.
Yes. Belgium, Holland. What was it again? Uganda, maybe.
Israel's one of them. Yeah.
All right.
And so there is a movement to try to get national initiative and referendum in the United States, but the problem is that, you know, you only have 24 states with it. So the citizens in the other 26 states would rather see it in their state first before it's on the national level.
So the national government never can make a law that it will, how do you say that it will force the states to make it possible to have on national issues a referendum.
They could. I mean, you know, there is no as it stands now, our federal government could not choose to put something to a federal vote unless our Constitution is changed allowing that.
Okay.
Our Constitution precludes national votes on issues. There has been some talk. There were some hearings in the 70s that Congress was considering a national INR process, and at the same time requiring states to have the initiative process as well. An interesting thing, in 1856, you know, every state in our country has what we call the referendum process, where the government can place something on the ballot. All 50 states, where the government can place stuff on the ballot to be voted on at the state level. And in 1856, Congress mandated that any new states have that requirement. So there has been some talk in Congress that they may mandate that the states have the initiative process as well. But then the concern is that if they require every state to have it, then there will be a push for it at the national level, and our congressmen don't want people nationally voting or pushing them to do things. So there's this there's this natural animosity between the elected officials and the people. The elected officials believe that they are the only ones who should be making laws, and the people should have no role in lawmaking. And so therefore they have no desire to expand the initiative and referendum process in our country. I think it will be possible, and I think it's inevitable, but it's going to require a lot of work.
Okay. Yesterday you told that you because you were going to come around 20th of January, and that was the same time that the inauguration was of George W. Bush. We always have to say W. Bush, eh?
Yeah, W. Yeah.
Or can you just say W?
W. Yeah.
W. You know him personally?
Well, I've met him. I mean, I've met him. Working for his father, you know, before he was governor, you know, working for George Sr.
No.
I met W. Or George Jr.
George
Jr.
Yeah.
Several occasions.
Yeah.
And then he became governor of Texas, and met him. You know, I've met him and had meetings with him. He's a very, you know, as you probably said, I think I heard you say. I personally supported, you know, John McCain when John McCain was running against George.
The war hero.
The
American war hero.
Who's a very wonderful man. So a lot of people who currently work for George W. Bush know that I supported John McCain, so there's some animosity there.
Yeah.
George W. Bush, when he was governor of Texas, when he was running for governor of Texas, supported the initiative and referendum process or direct democracy. But once he became governor, he did absolutely nothing.
Not even hearings.
Nothing.
Okay.
He wouldn't even issue a proclamation celebrating the 100th anniversary of direct democracy in the United States. And so our organization took him to task, and we had some op-eds in the Wall Street Journal. And talking about
critical
how
and
yeah. So he didn't care for that too much, and now that he's president, he has a lot more power and clout than we do. But we're optimistic that since he, President Clinton was adamantly opposed to the initiative and referendum process.
Was he?
Yes, he was. And Al Gore was adamantly opposed as well. But George W. Bush, because he has stated some support in the past, we're hoping that we can use that to have a national dialogue on the issue.
Okay. And so you had a discussion with him while he was president last week?
Yes,
or 2 weeks
we had
ago?
a discussion. We talked about it. There were no commitments made. It's a matter of we will be following up to try to figure out whether we can get some kind of national statement from him, figuring out whether we're having a conference in San Francisco in August of this year. Hopefully he'll come out and speak to it. The expansion of direct democracy in the United States is definitely a very low priority for the President of the United States at this point in time. But it's something that if we can get him to issue a statement, which we're trying to do, or to convince Congress to hold hearings, anything that he can do to increase the dialogue about the process.
What do you think of him? Were you glad that he became president? In favor of course, you wanted John Cain to win the Republican struggle for the candidacy. Can you say that? Candidacy?
Yeah, candidacy.
But then John McCain lost from George W. And then there was this big fight between Al Gore and George W. Bush.
Well, if you promise never to show this tape in the United States,
okay. If you're American and you are taping this, don't bring it to CNN. No, just saying.
No, as far as I believe that the President of the United States the most important responsibilities are foreign policy and defense issues, and that we have 535 members of Congress to deal with domestic issues. I believe that Al Gore would have been a much better president from foreign policy and defense issues than George W. Bush.
No.
So but choosing between Al Gore and George W. Bush was a very difficult thing, and neither one were exactly the best candidates out there. It's kind of.
Can you understand that for Europeans it was not difficult at all? I mean, even the right wing, we can't say it like that, but the Conservative Party, the ministers that were asked who in your favor for Al Gore or George W. Bush, all the Conservative ministers said, I'm in favor of Al Gore. So he's seen very right wing, very conservative. Not as a big intellectual, not a visionary man. Can you understand that?
I can understand that. I think I can completely understand why Europeans, and not only Europeans, but a lot of individuals I've met in South America and Asia, they would like to have seen Al Gore as president because of the continuation of foreign policy. They knew what the foreign policy would be. They knew what to expect. There would be possibly a continuation of some of the fiscal policies of the Clinton administration, which were conducive to European and international, international fiscal affairs. I can completely understand that, and that's one of the reasons that I had a very difficult time. I thought I supported Al Gore because I thought that there would be a continuation of foreign policy that I liked. I mean, I liked the Clinton foreign policy, and so it's completely understandable why people all over the world would like to see Al Gore a continuation versus George Bush, who really never clearly articulated his foreign policy, and who really has no foreign policy experience at all to speak of.
But he appointed Colin Powell as Minister of Foreign Affairs, and in that sense, that's of course might be a reason. A little bit, I have the feeling with Reagan, because Reagan is, I think Reagan and George Bush W are a little bit alike. They are much more focused on America as for the Americans, and in that sense there was a lot of space for the person who was foreign minister.
Well, the difference between Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush is that Ronald Reagan had a vision that he wanted to destroy communism. I mean, he clearly had a vision about foreign policy that he wanted to do whatever he could do to break up the Soviet empire and communism.
He was in Cold War terms.
I mean, he had that was his goal. Yeah. So George W. Bush has no overriding goal, concern about what the world should be like. Colin Powell, I think, will be an excellent Secretary of State. We have a very good defense secretary nominee. I believe, but the President of the United States, what will happen is that Colin Powell has a vision. The Secretary of State will have a vision. The Defense Secretary will have a vision. Our National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, will have a vision. And it will be the responsibility of the President to figure out whose vision to go with. And he will have to make some very difficult choices. Well, for example, Colin Powell will be, like if there's a hot spot in the world, say there's another Yugoslavia, and the decision will have to be made what involvement the U.S. will have in that. You may have a situation where Colin Powell is saying we should intervene, the Defense Secretary is saying we shouldn't, and the National Security Advisor saying that we should. The final decision is the President of the United States. And even though I have tremendous respect for Colin Powell and Condoleezza, he has to make the final decision, and I'm not confident enough that he has the background to make those decisions. Most presidents, when they come in, make foreign policy and getting to know foreign leaders a priority. George W. Bush has not made that a priority. He's probably going to meet with Tony Blair in March, possibly. But there aren't a lot of foreign dignitaries or meetings scheduled. He wants to focus on his domestic policy, which concerns me. I mean, I think George W. Bush as a person is a wonderful man. And I think that he's a good man. I think he has a good heart. I do believe that he has good intentions. It's just that I don't believe he is the most qualified person to be President of the United States.
So, but one other very big criticism we have here in Europe, I talk on behalf of all the Europeans that are watching now, is that the whole death penalty thing in Texas, and that's one of the horrifying things. So if you say he's a very nice person, then I immediately think, well, he signed himself many death penalties.
Well, being governor of Texas, the governorship of Texas is a very weak position. The lieutenant governor in Texas has most of the power, but the lieutenant governor, it's like the vice president. There's a lieutenant governor. There's the governor and there's a lieutenant governor. And the lieutenant governor in Texas has more power because he also is in control of the legislative branch. So he has more control and power over really what happens in the state of Texas. So the governor, the one power that the governor of Texas has is on death penalties. I mean, basically deciding who gets the death penalty and who doesn't. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but he has control over that. And one thing that George W. Bush wanted to show is that he was a very strong advocate of the death penalty. Had no problems exercising his right. Texas has carried out more deaths than any other state in the union.
And also under but is he also? Is it also the will of the majority of the people in Texas, you think?
Yeah, the polls. They did some polling to see how the Texans felt about the death penalty, and they do strongly support it. So it wasn't that he was at odds with the Texas people. There was some criticism that he was too quick to decide that certain people should be put to death, because with modern technology you have DNA now, and
I heard that about 20 people were set free because from the DNA test it showed, and they all were going to be executed. So there's some concern that he should have been a little bit more willing to give people the opportunity. I mean, we have a very unusual judicial system. It varies state to state. Excuse me, as far as the death penalty. I don't believe that George W. arbitrarily put people to death, but I do believe that I am not a strong advocate of the death penalty, so maybe my views are tainted a little bit. So. But let's jump to the initiative and referendum thing again. Would you, as an institute, support people who want to do an initiative on getting laws on death penalty, in favor of death penalty?
We're totally non-political and non-partisan. We support the process as a tool for everybody and anybody of any political persuasion to use. If somebody came to us and said, tell me how to use the process to adopt the death penalty, we would help them. If they came to us and said, how do we use the process to abolish the death penalty, we would help them.
Why is that? Is that because it sounds like a very fundamental principle that you want to be there for everybody, and that it's not up to you to decide what the people want to vote about?
Yeah, that's not, it's not my decision or up to us to decide what the people vote on. I mean, I have faith in the people. I trust the people. I trust, when 50% plus one of the people vote for something, I may be in the minority and may not agree with it.
Yeah.
But that's what 50% plus one agreed to, and I must, I will. My views will not always be in the majority.
No.
But I support everyone's ability to make their case to the public and let the public decide.
Well, one of the criticisms we hear often is that democracy is more than 50% plus one, and that a referendum is always so very digital. It's yes or no, and that there's more to democracy. That's, for example, protecting minority views and minority groups. How do you deal with that argument?
Well, theoretically, the initiative process in the United States is, and like it is all over the world, it is a lawmaking mechanism. There is always the possibility that laws could be made that impact minority groups, just like there's the same possibility that members of the legislature or parliament could pass laws that impact minorities. The check and balance on that, at least in the United States, is our judicial system. We have a judicial system that any law passed, whether it's by the people or by the state legislatures, if it infringes on anybody's human rights, constitutional rights, the courts can step in and strike it down, as they have done on a few occasions, not just from laws passed by the initiative process, but laws passed by the legislature as well.
Yeah. So there is some checks and balances in that case. Yes. Do you like America? As a country?
I love America. I mean, we're like every country. We have our own problems. We have issues that need to be addressed. I do love it. It's my homeland. I love Europe as well. I may have to move here, especially after this interview when George W. Bush sees it. But
right, he kicks you out.
Can't revoke my passport.
Yeah.
But no, we're a country of 275 million people, very large country with a very, very diverse population. And the states vary from, and you go to New Hampshire, you have a group of people who believe in a certain ideology. You go to California, and you get a different group there. So it's a very difficult country to govern.
Yeah,
it is, and I feel for anybody who's president, because it's almost impossible to get a consensus on anything, which is one of the concerns about national referendums. How do you build a consensus? But we are a wonderful country, and
Can you imagine that during the election time and after that, with all the ballots and the counting and everything, that let me put it this way: there was some. I think it went on the internet, and I got an email, and it was like from an African professor, and he said, "Here, listen about this country," and then he summed up some things that the son of the president wanted to be elected, and an awful lot of things that, if you just read it like that without naming America or mentioning America, that it sounded like incredible corrupt African backwarded country. In every sentence, every argument he gave was true.
Yeah, no, a lot of people, that discussion went on for a long time in the United States, that if you look at what happened in Florida and the votes and the fact that, George W. Bush's brother was the governor of the state.
Right, exactly, things like that. His brother is the governor, where the votes are not politically correct.
It would be like it was a third world country holding an election. Yeah. And a lot of people, it's interesting, there was this discussion that several countries offered to send election advisors to our country because
the Americans always sending
them. And that's what was and Americans say, oh my God, we don't need election advisors. If what happened in Florida happened anywhere else in the world, we would quickly be denouncing that. We would quickly be saying, "Oh, it was an illegitimate election," especially when the highest court in the land got involved and issued an opinion, which they even wrote is a one-time opinion.
But they were appointed by the father of many. Were appointed by the father of the son who is running for president.
I mean, I personally believe that Al Gore won Florida. I personally believe. I don't believe that the election was stolen from him per se, but I do believe that the way it was handled was not correct, and that.
But it was not on purpose.
It was not on purpose. I don't think there was no conspiracy. There was no conspiracy by Jeb Bush and George W. Bush and Katherine Harris, and there was no conspiracy. It's just the way that it's interesting that being in the 21st century, that we are a country who our electoral mechanisms are 18th century. And so.
Do you think they will change after this blamage, as we say in? Europe?
I think they will. I think they're the secretaries of states who are responsible for the elections are meeting to talk about how to better the electoral system. What has happened in the country, state legislators, every state is responsible for their own elections, and state legislators are responsible for allocating money for the electoral process. And what has happened, unfortunately, is that allocating money for new machines and is a very, very low priority because there's no constituency for it. You see legislators giving money to new roads and new libraries and to universities because there's a voting constituency there. There is no voting constituency about a good election machine.
No.
But now they're being forced to look at that. I do believe it will change. I think Congress will hold hearings on it and probably allocate some money to the states.
What do you think of the fact that in general or nationwide, Al Gore had 300,000 votes more, which is of course still a small percentage.
Right.
I think it was once measured, it was 0.4% more of the votes. But because of this complicated, how do you call them in America? The
electorals.
The electorals.
Electoral system.
It worked out differently. What do you think about that system? Should that change too?
Well, in theory, I like the electoral college and electoral system. I do
Why is
believe.
that?
Well, I think that the reason it came about was to put. I mean, in theory, the way our country is, if you had a popular vote, allowed just a popular vote to elect the president, California, Michigan, Texas, and New York, basically 6 states could vote for a president and leave the other 44 out. I mean, just because of the sheer magnitude of the population of those states.
Right.
So the Electoral College is designed to give pretty much equal representation to all the states, so the most populous states just can't choose the president.
Right.
In theory, I like that. However, what I think should happen, I mean, the way the Electoral College works, and very simply, is that if a state like Florida has 27 members of Congress, they have 27 electoral votes, and it's a kind of a winner take all. That whoever wins the popular vote in Florida gets all 27 of those electoral votes.
Right.
I disagree with that. I think that what should happen is that it should be based upon whoever wins the congressional district. They should be divided. So if Al Gore won 14 congressional districts in Florida, he should get 14 electoral votes. And I think that if you'd gone to a system like that across the country, I do believe there's a possibility that Al Gore would have won the Electoral College without even with the electoral vote, because there were counties in Texas, even though that's where Bush was from, that voted in favor of Al Gore. But George W. Bush got all the electoral votes for Texas because that's where he's from.
And
so I think
that was a big one, wasn't it?
It was a big one. 37.
37.
So there should be some changes. I don't think we should abolish the Electoral College. But I do believe there should be a lot of education of the people about the Electoral College, because very few people prior to this election even understood what it was.
Because that's another problem in America, is that voters have to register. So and that's an extra step that people should take to make it possible for them to vote. And it's well known that a lot of people in the Hispanic and the Black community is not doing that. How come that? Do you think that will change? That they, like in Holland, people are registered in the city, and when they're 18 years old and they are, how do you say that, a citizen of the state of Holland, they have automatically a right to vote. And everybody gets at his home address his vote card. Would that change in America?
Well,
because now it's 50% of the people that is going to vote.
Right. Well, what in America, you have to take a proactive step to register to vote. You have to physically go in and say, I want to vote. They did pass a law a few years ago called Motor Voter, where you go and get your driver's license, and when you get your driver's license, you can ask, okay, go ahead and register me to vote. So that has increased voter registration rolls.
It passed.
It passed.
Okay.
But I do believe, I think that it should be automatic, that as soon as somebody turns 18, that they're automatically allowed to vote, and they can just go to the polls and vote. I think that would be great. Typically, what happens in poorer neighborhoods, I mean, if you look at the fiscal demographics of our country, the poorer the individual, the less likely they are to register to vote. Why that is, I mean, it's a socio-economic, philosophical debate we can have, but they don't vote. And African American communities typically vote more Democratic than they do Republican. So you do see, it's out of self-interest, where the Democratic Party is trying to get more African Americans registered because they know in theory they vote more along Democratic lines. Yeah. So I do see an increase in the African American participation. The Hispanic increase is interesting because they're estimating that by 2015 that over 50% of Californians will be Hispanic.
Really? Also Hispanic speaking?
Hispanic heritage, Hispanic speaking, so there's a very strong likelihood that population will represent over 50% of the voting bloc in California. So I think that you're seeing the Hispanic community is realizing that. They're registering to vote because they can see the impact that they can have politically as a voting bloc. So I think it's changing. It's going to be interesting to see how these cultural differences work out in our country. Just like that's an issue in any country. But I do believe you'll see more participation.
Yeah. Okay. So. Bill Clinton. Let's talk about him. He said goodbye to the office. What was your opinion about him? I mean, knowing that you worked for John McCain and before that for George Bush. George Bush was beaten by Clinton. What do you think of him?
I believe Bill Clinton. He's a master politician. It's mind-boggling to think of all the problems he had, and he was able to escape every single one of them. It's a testament to his ability to be a good politician. I think that overall, as far as the economic factors in our country, I think he was a good president for the economy. I don't think he was a good president for social issues. But I believe he's a president whose impact, you'll see him around. He's not going to go away. He's not going to be like a Ronald Reagan or a George Bush.
He's still young, actually.
He's still very young.
52? How old is he?
54? He's 54 years old. But I think he did a lot of good things for the country. And I think he did a lot of bad things for the country. He brought some disgrace to our country, and
because of the Monica Lewinsky affair.
Because of the Monica Lewinsky scandal and the fact that he lied to the American public. He committed perjury. Yeah. And so, but to some degree, I think that, but the American public still overwhelmingly support him. Yeah. Primarily because of the economy. And I said to somebody today, I said that if because they were curious, well, why wasn't he impeached? Why didn't he actually was forced out of office? I truly believe that if the economy had been bad, he would have been impeached. Yes, he would have gone. But because the economy was good, the American public decided to keep him around. And our elected officials during the impeachment were driven by the polls and what the people thought. There's no doubt about that. But he'll be around. I mean, there's still scandals following him after leaving office, renting $700,000 a year in office space and taking $190,000 in gifts. But he's going to be a major player in the Democratic Party for years to come. And
maybe also a negotiator for peace processes outside, maybe even under George W. Bush. Or don't you think so?
Well, the foreign policy, I don't believe that the foreign policy views of Clinton are those of the Bush administration.
No, that's true. No, but for example, maybe not now, but in 4 years, and George Bush is re-elected, and there is some problem in Israel or in the Middle East. He has a lot of good contacts.
Yeah,
he made a lot of friends all over the world.
One thing that Bill Clinton did successfully was he used individuals like Bob Dole and Bob Mitchell and to send all over the world to help in hot spots. And I do believe that a past president, that's a very good role for them. I don't believe that after somebody has served 8 years serving our country that they should just be cast out. I do believe that they should be brought in to help out. And you're right, if Bush is smart, he will use Clinton in certain areas, in certain hot spots. But we'll see, if Bush does that.
Okay. We are at the end of the show already. Talked 45 minutes about the American society and political. Do you have, can you say, this is a silly question maybe, but do you have the best advice you could give to the Dutch people concerning politics? If you think it's a silly question,
no, it's not a silly question. I mean, I my personal thought. I mean, I when I travel around the world, the first thing I try to instill in people is that, number one, hold your elected officials accountable. Hold them accountable. Don't let them get away with it. Too often people and I've noticed this a lot in European countries, when elected officials do something that that they just defer to the elected officials and basically let them off the hook. I would say that, especially this referendum law, don't let the elected officials get away with it by just saying, I'm giving you something, when in reality it's not something that will benefit the people. Yeah. So that's the advice I'd give them. Get involved, hold their elected officials accountable, and make sure the elected officials know that the people are the sovereign, that the people are the people who control government, not the government itself. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming here.
Thank you for having me.
And it was an incredibly expensive ticket to get you over here, but we're very glad you came.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. I'm going to do my small closing statement. Let's shake hands. That's always so good on television. Dames en heren, dit was Agora. Ik zie u hopelijk volgende week weer opnieuw. En mocht u nog vragen hebben naar aanleiding van deze uitzending of opmerkingen, dan kunt u volgens mij nog altijd e-mailen naar agora@kleurnet.nl. Ik dank u en tot de volgende keer.